All right, guys, welcome back to the shack. Today we're going to be working on the laser project of many different items. And so I still have a lot of questions from folks from time to time about being able to batch out things using jigs. Now, I know there's a lot of machines out there that boast the ability to be able to batch things out, AI. You just throw them in there and it batches them out. Well, personally, I haven't found one of those that I trust with my blanks. I prefer to do things the old-fashioned way, making a jig, fixture, whatever you want to call it. I like to create a file and do a little extra manual work to make sure that I'm not wasting my blanks. So today I'm going to be working on some ink pens. These are ink pens that if you've ever come to an event that I was at, or if you're another content creator and we've ever met up at an event, I give these out a lot to folks on the road, and it's just a pen that says the Clack Shack on it, nothing special. I got these from a friend of mine, got a pretty good deal on them, and so I use them to, kind of do marketing stuff with. Well, I got a few of them to do for an upcoming event that we got going on this weekend, and so today we're going to start out. I'm going to bring you guys along. And we'll start out with the first small box, okay? These are the same pens, they're just black. So that's what we're gonna be working on. I'm gonna show you how to make sure all of your ink pens look exactly alike. You don't waste any blanks. So if that's something you're into, stick around and we're gonna engrave some pens. All right, so I want to lay down what we're going to be doing to start with, just to make sure everybody understands exactly what we got going on. Is I want all of these pens to be identical, okay? When I engrave them, I want each pen to look like the other one. And in order to do that, consistency is key. Now, like I said, there are machines out there that say they can use software and you can just throw them down there haphazardly. It'll pick them out. AI will tell it exactly how to place it and it'll burn it. I haven't found one of those that's 100%. If you know of one that's 100% all of the time, let me know. Because the time that I save using that feature, I typically spend having to go back and look at each one to make sure the graphic is where it was supposed to be. And so is it really time saved or just time spent doing something different? So I spent less time placing them, but more time doing my quality control. Not to mention, occasionally you're going to have that one that you're going to have to toss because it wasn't where it needed to be. Now, there may be some of you that have great success and the cost of your blanks is affordable and you like those automated systems. And if that's the case, then this video is probably not going to be for you. But if you have, especially if you're doing blanks that are a little more expensive, you don't want to waste them, or you're just OCD and you want them the same, then that's what we're going to be doing. So in order to accomplish our goal, which is making these pens all look the same, we're going to need to do a few things. All right, and those steps are going to vary depending on the machine that you have. This technique works with all kinds of machines, whether you're using an open frame, whether you're using a closed frame blue diode, whether you're using a galvo, or whether you're using a CO2 machine. The principles of the process are identical. If you're using LightBurn, the steps that you're going to go through are basically the same. The only difference is, of course, the operating system of the machine and the things that you need to consider for designing this design. I'm going to be using the Omtech Polar Plus today for this job because, one, it's a CO2 machine. These things are not that big. The work area is going to give me an opportunity to do just enough of them that I can do other things while they're running, but not so many that it's going to be an all-day project. So that's what we're going to be using today. You can do this same process using the AtomStack A70, the AtomStack X40, or even any of these guys hanging on the wall. The thing that you got to remember when we start talking about referencing a physical location is that the machine and the file that you create, those have to be in a locked in position. Nothing can move. Once you've created this file, you have to be able to put things back exactly where they were. So whether you're using one of my leg kits that I sell on Etsy for the various machines, somehow or another, there has to be a physical consistency with those files that you're making and the machine. For the Omtech, what we're going to be using is the way that this machine is made. The honeycomb is inserted and it's always in the same spot. And so we're going to take advantage of that. And that's another reason why I prefer the Omtech Polar Plus over some of the competition, is because of that feature of being able to put things in there and have them line up perfectly every time. All right, so here's the machine we're going to be using. And like I said, with this machine, guys, it is set up to where the honeycomb has this little ridge that it slides into inside the machine. So you pull this crumb tray out to remove any debris or anything that's under there. And then this honeycomb slides into a little track right here, and it slides in there and goes toward the back. Now, one thing that they didn't do from the factory, which would have been helpful, is they didn't really give me any way to like lock it right here. There is a little bit of a gap that it could move in the event that a machine got bumped, or you handle something a little rough. So one thing that I like to do, just to kind of fix that, keep that from happening, is I use a couple of pieces of painter's tape, and I'll go right here on the edges of the honeycomb where the honeycomb touches the metal. And I'm basically going to take that painter's tape, and I'm going to create myself a little clamp, so to speak, to kind of hold that in place. And I'm going to do that on both sides. If you have this machine, you're familiar with it. If not, I'll get my little camera here, and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about doing. All right, so what I did is I took a piece of painter's tape, and I basically just connected this little piece of metal here that holds the honeycomb to the honeycomb, just to keep it from easily being able to slide out. I'm leaving me little ears right here to make it a little simpler to remove that. So once I get that on there, then I can put my little crumb tray back in place, and we're good to go on that. The next part is I've got to have the file setting to where it can stay in here and not move. And as you'll see now with the honeycomb doesn't move. I always recommend, if you're going to index your machine, if you're using this machine and you don't have a bigger machine to cut your panel with, you can index now using this top left corner right here, and use this as your flat edge, and you can index your material right there to create a jig from any little piece of scrap material that you may have laying around. So for instance, if this was what you're going to use for your jig, you can index it using that corner right there of the machine. And then all you've got to do once it gets it in position, put you a little painter's tape on there to make sure it doesn't wiggle. And you could use this. You could do it just strictly like this. Little painter's tape over here to make sure nothing moves. You could actually painter's tape along both edges. And then you could use this area down here. Now what I'm wanting to do is I'm wanting to use the whole work area of my machine. So what I have done is I went on my larger machines over here on the Atom Stack X40, and I have cut myself a panel that is the same size as the honeycombed area of my honeycomb, which is going to allow me to basically use the whole honeycomb to do this. So let me turn the lights on this thing so we can see what we're doing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and slide this to the corner of the work area right there, and it's going to sit down in the honeycomb all the way around. And once I've got that in there, I know that's not going to move because it's attached to the honeycomb. The honeycomb is attached to the machine. Everything is basically one big machine. So now what I need to do to make sure this doesn't get bumped, knocked around, or moved is I'm going to use some more painter's tape, and I'm just going to tape it on there. I'm using this as actually my reference, so if I ever need to set this back up, this is my reference. This is my index point. So if I've got a gap anywhere, it doesn't need to be here. This is going to be always going to be my reference. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some of my little thin blue painter's tape here. Again, making sure that I'm up into the top left corner of this honeycomb. And I'm going to do the same thing on the back right here on this top left corner. And that is going to secure everything in place for me. Now there's other ways that you can do this. This is not the only way. And I'm not going to make fun of you if you do it a different way. This is just the way that I've been doing it. This is the way that works for me. I've had really good results, and it doesn't require a whole lot of extra equipment So there we go. We've got that kind of laid in there. Now we're ready to move on. Like I said, you can cut this if you have a bigger machine, or you could technically cut this with saws. So if you just had a skill saw, table saw, you know, whatever kind of saw, you could just measure the honeycomb, cut your panel, put it in here, and now you have your full work area. It's really secure. That's what I like about it, is I've got, you know, plenty of security in keeping my material from moving, and now we can lay the file out and get it ready to go. All right, so we're in LightBurn. I've got the Omtech Polar Plus pulled up. If you're interested in the machine, if you want to take a look at it or just see what the specs are of this machine, I will drop a link down below. That will be an affiliate link if you decide to purchase, of course. And we appreciate that. But to do this file, like I said, I've already got the machine set up with the jig plate. So this is going to be one of those to where I'm going to try to make it the file to where it's right the first time, so I don't have to redo this thing. You'll notice with my camera, because the camera is so close to the work area, I try to get it as accurate as I can. But you can't see the whole work area with the right calibration. So I actually have a couple of different calibrations that I can use. If I need the camera to be a little more exact, I can import a different camera calibration, and that will allow it to be a little more exact, but you won't be able to see the entire work area. So that's kind of the deal with the camera. So this is a lot more exact if I was needing to trace something or whatever, but for the sake of this design, we're not going to be using the camera that much. So I'm going to go back in here to my machine files, and I'm going to reload the just standard full screen camera view, because the way this camera is, it's hard to get it to be where you can see the entire work area and be accurate. This is as accurate as it gets to be able to see the entire work area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my calipers here, and I'm going to measure the little clicker, the little clip part of this pin, because that's the part that I want to have a recess to set down in, and that should hold these pins in place. And so the measurement, the actual measurement on this little pin piece here is like 8.09, 8.11. So knowing that this machine has a pretty good little kerf on it, especially with this material, I'm just going to set my width for my little holder thing. I'm going to set the width for 8. So I'm going to draw me a little box, rectangle, whatever, and I'm going to set the height at 8, because I feel like that's going to be, by the time I add kerf, I feel like that's going to be plenty of room. Now for the other part, what we need to do is add the length of this little tab, so that when we line them up and set them in there, there's enough room that it can set flat, but we want it to be holding it still. So this is going to be a little tricky to do with the way this thing is shaped, but I'm going to call this 47.5. So on our width, we're going to go with 47.5 as the width. So that little hole right there, that is going to be what amounts to our hole in the material. But now I also, because I want to make sure I don't mistakenly orient my pins wrong, I also want to have a shape to kind of signify, you know, the pin itself. That way I can use it as a visual reference when I'm loading and unloading and know which way the pins point, so I don't put one in there backwards. So I'm going to measure the length of the entire pin, which comes out to about 139.47. So I'm going to be a little generous on this second rectangle, and I'm going to make this second one on the width, I'm going to make it 142. That gives me a little extra, because this is more or less just a visual go by. And I'm going to set this one to a line but not a cut as well. On the width, I need the maximum width or thickness of the ink pen is what I want to use on this one. And if I take and measure there, that's like the widest part of this ink pen, and it says 10.94. So about 11 millimeters in the thickness there should give me what I need. So I'm going to go back in here to this particular shape, and I'm going to set my height on that one to 11 and hit OK. Now, the thing that I've got to remember is that these two shapes. This one is the, if you look at the ink pen, the red one is where that recess comes off of there, the clip, and then the blue one is the actual shape of the pen itself. So what I don't need is I don't need this part all the way to the top. So I need to kind of measure how far off of the tip this little recess needs to begin, and kind of make sure I slide that down enough to make this, you know, make my outline fit where the pen needs to be. So going back into the software, I'm going to measure using my calipers again. I'm going to measure from where I measured at on the little drop down box to the tip of the pen, and it looks like about 14 millimeters. So in order to set that up correctly, I'm just going to create myself a little box, and I'm going to set this little box to be 14 millimeters wide. And I really don't care how tall it is, because this is literally, this is like my little virtual measuring stick is all this is. And so I'm going to take this little guy and I'm just going to put it in here. And I'm going to line it up, and it does have to be exact, but you see I've got snap turned on. So it laid it right on top of that outside line right there. And then I'm going to take and pull this guy up and just butt it up against it, because that way I know that I'm at least far enough to make this work. Now, I want to make sure that this stuff's all aligned properly, so I'm going to select all of them, and I'm going to use the little horizontal alignment tool there to align everything together. Now, this should have everything laid out. That actually needs to be a tool line, not a pencil line. This is going to be like basically a little sketch line on my panel so that I know which way the pens orient. This is going to be a hole in the panel for the pen to lay through, but it's going to be just tight enough to hold the pen straight, I hope. All right, so now I've got to figure out exactly where the text needs to be in relation to this, and I can create myself a little text box. Now, since this is no longer being needed for alignment, I can actually borrow this little guy and just set these two here. Like, I can group these two together so nothing gets moved, and then I can use this little guy for my text. I always like using a little tool line for my text, because that way you can center off of it, and you know you've got consistency throughout your entire file. And if I select all of this stuff, again, using the horizontal alignment tool, that's going to put my text aligned with the pen. Now, if you look at this pen, the way that these little lines right here kind of roll around it, I've got a limited area in the middle right here that's pretty wide, but it's kind of in the middle. So I need to be strategic about where I put the text. So what I want to do is I want to measure the entire area that I have available for text right here that I feel comfortable with. And then once I measure that entire area, we're going to create that in LightBurn, and then I'm going to offset it from the tip here to avoid, see where these lines come real close together? I want to offset it from the tip to avoid that. That's going to give me some space from like there to about right there. And I'm going to create that virtually in my file so that I know not to go past that, or I risk getting too close to those little decorations right there. So let's drop back down in the software and do that. So calipers, again, if you haven't noticed it yet, guys, if you don't have calipers and you're using lasers, go get yourself a set on Amazon. I will have a link to that as well below. I got plenty of links, guys. And the more you use them, the better it is for me. I appreciate the support. So looking at this area that I have, we're going to call that, I'm going to call it 70 millimeters. So we're going to say I got a 70 millimeter area in the middle of this pen that I can use. So this little piece right here, this little part right here, I'm going to set the width on that, which it's almost there. I'm going to just set that to 70 millimeters. Hit OK. So now that I know how far it is from there, I can either measure from the tip of the pen, or I can measure from the back here at the clip that's on the back of it. But I find that it's going to be easier for me to measure from the tip of the pen. And I'm going to measure back up the pen until I get into that safe zone where I feel like, you know, my text is not in danger. And it looks like it's going to be 40 millimeters from the end is where I'm going to be safe with my text. So again, I'm going to draw me another little just random box right here. And I'm going to set the width on this one to 40 millimeters. And I'm just going to use it as a measuring tool. That's all I want this box for. I'm going to set it right there on top of that. And then I'm going to slide this guy right here using the arrow keys until I get it right there on that. That gives me 45 millimeter offset from the tip of the pen. So now that I've got that, I can literally delete this guy. So that appears to be the way that I need it. If you would want this a little more, I guess, presentable for your design, on the ends of the pen, you notice that this part right here is a little thinner than the rest of the pen. It's kind of rounded over, and then of course the tip is pointed. If you wanted to, and had the time and wanted to spend the time, you could go in here with a radius tool because of that, and you can ungroup this first of all. And once you ungroup this, you can go in and add the radiuses to these corners right here to kind of round things up on this one. It's going to give you a little bit of a radius there. And then like with, for instance, down here on this end, what I would do is go to the node editor and probably step on top of this guy, insert a node, and then I'm going to just click it and move it. It's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 millimeters up. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to drop a node. We'll insert one right there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Move that one in. 8. All right, and so now I can hold right here and to hit the letter M. Drop one in the middle right there. And then I can go up here and delete that guy. And delete that guy. And so now it kind of gives you a visual, a little more of a visual cue as to where everything needs to go. So this is what I think my pen layout needs to be. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select it. I'm going to bring it over here. I'm going to put it, I don't want to put it too close to the corner because like I said, I don't want my machine slowing down too much in those cuts. But I do want enough room to where I can put at least 2, if not 3 of these things. So if I put them together like that, I can kind of line it up. So I'm going to say about right there. Now what I want to do before I go getting too crazy with this is I want to go ahead and run this one right here. I want to group these together for a minute. And I'm going to go ahead and run this to make sure that's the shape that I need. I'm going to sort this cuts last, of course. Okay, and so I'm going to go ahead and send this over to the machine and frame it up over there. All right, so with this machine, it sends the file over, and I just have to hit the frame button here. It's going to move out to where the file is, and it's going to frame. The one thing that I don't like about this machine is I don't have a red dot. I have marked the chassis, but I'm pretty good with the work area, so I know exactly where it's supposed to be, luckily. I do have autofocus with this little button right here. So I'm going to hit the autofocus. The laser head is going to go down, it's going to touch off, and it's going to raise back up. So now we're focused, and we can run this. The only thing that I'm really, with this machine, the Z-bed, the Z-axis is kind of shallow without taking the honeycomb out of it. I'm hoping that doesn't give me an issue with this file. I'm hoping that we're able to go ahead and just run them as they are without the module being too low. So we're going to have to adjust the Z and all that and play with that in a minute. But that's going to give us our hole for the little clip as well as kind of a visual reference of where it goes. Hopefully that works. Alright, so I'm going to get my little piece of material out of there. I'm going to check, make sure it holds my pen like I want it to. So yeah, they're a little wobbly. I was kind of afraid that they might be with one layer jig like this. I may end up having to make a 2-layer jig and have the other layer hold them up here. That's not digging that. So let's look into what we got to do about that. All right, so what I've decided is I'm gonna do a 2-layer jig. So we're gonna go ahead and run with this one as far as this part of the job. I'm gonna go ahead and select that shape, and we're gonna array those. And of course, I got it laid out where I want 3 in the bottom, and then I just want to space them up. Now, you can put these as close or as far apart as you want. I'm going to put a little space in between them just to add a little more rigidity to this file, because I've got to now make this a 2-layered file, and I don't want to be cutting, you know, these little pieces too thin in between the pins. So I think about right there is where I want to go as far as the spacing, because this is going to be 2 layers. So that's going to give me a custom jig there for 39 total objects. So I'm good with that. So we're going to hit OK. It's going to group them all together. But because I've already done one of these, I'm going to ungroup these real quick. And I'm going to set this guy here just as a complete tool line. I can go back and change that later, but I don't need the rest of these to be done that way. So I'm going to change my settings. I had the power on that for some reason did not cut as well as I'd like for it to. So I'm going to throw that down to 6 millimeters a second. Should be able to run 1 pass. So we'll go from there. But that's it. I'm going to send that over to the machine, let it cut all these little squares out. And then we're going to do another one where we're going to cut out this blue line here. And then I'm going to stack them and use it as a jig that way. It's a little more work, but it's going to give me a lot more stable base for these pins to make sure they don't move around. So let's get it started. Send it over to the machine, and you can always, like with this, I can name this whatever, and it's gonna write it over there. The cool part about that is once I get this file created and I get the design for the pins put on there, I don't have to come back to my computer to continue to run them. So we're gonna send this over. Already did it one time. So we're gonna send it over and get it started. All right, guys. So a few minutes later, a little bit of cutting, some cleanup, and I now have the 2 pieces that are going to go together to make this little jig. And the file, like I said, using a multi-layered file like this to create this, it takes a little time. This is definitely something that if you're just doing 5, this may not be something you want to go through, but I've got a box of a couple thousand of these. And so this little bit of work that I'm doing on the front end compared to the overall job, it's going to be well worth it. And not only that, but even if I have more of these pins to come in, I can still use this jig to do this job. So this thing can stay with me for a while. So with the 2 holes together, now what I have is a very secure, very easy to maintain little hole for the pin to sit in. Now, like I said, with this machine, one of the only things that I will knock my Polar Plus for is I don't have a whole lot of travel as far as with the honeycomb in there. It's not a lot of room on the Z-axis to be doing stuff like this, the way that it's built. So this is going to be about the extent of what I'm going to be able to do as far as going up. Anything that I have that needs to be lower than that, I have to make basically an insert that goes in here in the place of the honeycomb. And I haven't modified it too much. This is what I use for bamboo cutting boards. But what I've done is I've created this little shell basically, and this slides in there to where the honeycomb goes and locks in place. And I've got a design that I just haven't done it yet, to where I can create a holder for jigs similar to this one here, and they just drop in the middle to kind of minimize the material that you use. And also that allows you to be able to cut through the material and make those item files inside the machine. So, but this is one that I use for doing bamboo cutting boards that I do like weekly. And now I've got this one coming out. This is going to be a more or less, this is going to be a jig that tops the honeycomb rather than replaces the honeycomb. But like I said, I can go back and create that file to allow these things to recess in there in place of the honeycomb also. So let's get this thing glued together and get it back in the machine, and we're going to line it up and see what we can do. So we'll mark this one, and we'll also put us a little text on here. And this text serves two purposes. One, it shows me which way's up. And two, it labels it. So if it's something weird that you don't use a lot, you'll recognize it. This one, you know, it should be kind of obvious what it is. But if you had, like, let's say you had a part number for the pins that you purchased, that you made this for, and you had a part number, you could include that on here. Of course, you could always mark it with a Sharpie too, but I prefer marking stuff, you know, with the laser. So I'm going to send this over to the machine. And like I said, this is just going to be a little score line, nothing too extravagant. But all right, so we got it in there, got everything lined up. I think we're ready to go. Just to test my settings as well as the jig placement, I'm going to start out, I'm going to put 2 pins in there. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the 2 furthest lines on the bottom, and I'm going to place the pins there. And the reason I don't want them too close together is because the further apart they are, if there's any variation, it'll be a lot more noticeable the further off they are. So we're going to put 2 pins in there and run a little test burn real quick. So as I said, I'm going to be putting the one over here on the left side, and then I'm going to move over here to the right side, and I'm going to drop the other one in there. And you can see they're sitting in there really snug, really nice. So hopefully everything's going to work well with this. The one thing that I am going to have to do is set the focus. Setting the focus with these guys could be a little challenging, the way that this machine focuses. So I'm just going to set that one there. I want to drive my machine over that way. I do need to raise my Z up. This machine has a unique Z focus setting, the way that it works. So I'm going to move the machine over, and what I've got to do is I've got to put the nozzle over the top of the pin, which is going to be hard to see because the nozzle's up above this cover. But if you look, I made myself a little line right there using another laser, and so I've got a little bit of a go by. So I've got to hit the focus button now. The nozzle is going to come down, touch the pin, and go back up. So yeah, we're really kind of close to these things. Looks like it's going to clear it, but yeah, that's one of the negatives that I have about this setup. But I could counteract this by doing my jig below the honeycomb instead of on top of the honeycomb, and that's what I do in some cases. But I did a little bit of math earlier and realized that this would work. It's just not going to give me any extra room. So there we go. We got 2 in there. I'm going to go over here and set the file up now. All right, because we set this file up with those cuts, just basically we had everything programmed in the software, and we burned it, and we haven't moved anything. Everything is hard indexed off that top left corner of the honeycomb. So everything should be exactly where it shows on this file. One of the most important things is to make sure you've saved your file. So I'm going to bump that save button just to be sure. All right, so now I need to make my text, which my text is going to be, let's go ahead and type it. Apparently that layer is not showing up. So we'll change this layer to that. There we go. And I'm going to make the right font. So I'm going to use, for these pins, I could use a bunch of these different fonts. I kind of want to use my copper black here. So what I'm going to go do is I'm going to shrink this down. And now I've got to make sure the text fits in that little box. Because if you remember earlier, we were talking about I only had so much room on the ink pens to be able to pull this off. And so I'm going to hit Control and wait a minute. I got to ungroup those guys. Let me ungroup these. So the way that I've got this set up right now, because I didn't put the text in there beforehand, I've got to hit Control, click that box there. Well, it's still not ungrouped. Let me get it to where it's ungrouped. Okay, now I think I'm ungrouped. So I'm going to click the text first, then the box. and I'm going to hit the little center button. So now the text is centered in the box. And I'm going to duplicate or copy that text, and I want to put it over here on this one too. That way I don't have, right now I've only got 2 of them loaded, so I'm only going to run 2. Now these are some kind of metal pins, but with the CO2 machine it shouldn't matter. I am going to run, let's see, what kind of settings do I got in here that might work. We've got coated tumbler. I don't know that there's a need for that much power. As far as the LPI and stuff, that'd be about, well, 490. Yeah, I think that's 500 LPI. Yeah, that should work. Now, one thing that I will do is I am going to add a Z offset. Now, this machine is backwards when it comes to Z offset for some reason. So I'm going to move it -1. I would normally do 2. Actually, I got to do +1 because this one's backwards. So I'm going to do a +1 Z offset, which is going to raise the beam up 1 millimeter. Normally, I would do 2 on something bigger, but because this text is so small, I'm just going to do 1 just to make sure I get a little bit of overlap with this design. So we should be good. I'm going to double check my layers. All of my tooling layers that I have, I mean, it doesn't matter if it shows these or not. It can show those layers. You just don't want it outputting any of those layers. The only layer that you want outputting currently is going to be the fill. So I'm going to take and I'm going to send that over to the machine, and we're going to run these 2 test pins. So I'm going to name this file test pins and send it over. It went well, but there's a little bit of an alignment problem. That side looks great. This side, not so much. I don't know how I screwed this up, guys, but I kind of got my jig off a little. I don't know exactly what happened. I do have a little, like right there, somehow or another, I got it out of alignment. So, gonna fix that. I think I'm gonna take the honeycomb out and put my jig on the honeycomb and then put everything back in there. So let's do that. So I got the jig out of the machine, and upon further evaluation, guys, I screwed up. When I put it on there, you can see here, I did not put it down on the honeycomb. And that's probably because the module was in the way. This is so high. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to put it on the honeycomb on the table, and then I'm going to put it over in the machine, and we'll try it again. So, yeah, sometimes things don't go according to plan. All right, guys. Fast forward a little bit in this video. Things didn't go according to plan, and somebody forgot to hit the record button, didn't record, battery died. I don't know. I lost some video along the way. But after the 2 pins that I ran here, and I realized that my jig was out of alignment, I fixed the jig, put a couple more pins back in there, and then that's when I realized I had yet another issue. And the issue was that I was getting some shadowing on the pins. You can see this is the one that at first it was off, but then I corrected it, but you know, I did another one, and then I started noticing, I was like, this is shadowing really, really bad. Well, turns out I did not realize it. I've had this machine quite a while. I did not realize it, but you cannot turn off the air assist on an Omtech Polar Plus. It's always on. And so what was happening was the air assist was, as it was blowing across the pin, it was causing the pin to rock ever so slightly, which was causing that shadowing. It was more predominantly on the right side for some reason. I'm guessing because as the laser came in, it was hitting this little shoulder right here. The wind was, and that wind, as it was hitting that shoulder, was having more of an effect on the pin than it was the one on the left, because the one on the left is kind of rounded. That's all I can come up with. But anyway, the pin, I could see it in there ever so slightly, just rocking, and it was causing an issue with my engrave. So what I ended up having to do was stop recording, thus the lost video, and figure out a way to turn off my air assist without electronically turning off my air assist. In other words, I just fixed it to where I could unplug it at the module and keep it from blowing on the pin to finish this job. So let's get back to the video, but I just want to fill you in where the video got lost. So we're going to fast forward now. All right, guys, so after a little bit of fine tuning, got some good results, and I now have a box of freshly engraved pins. Now I'm gonna grab a few of these out of here and show them to you, show you how well they went. But in the beginning, when we were doing that fine tuning and that slight adjustment that was needed, and when I discovered the problem with the air assist, I did have two that ended up being sacrificed to the cause. But never fear, I'm always needing pins here in the shop, so that's where these guys end up. These guys will be over here on my little pin holder that I've made, and when I'm trying to draw something up or doing something in the shop, or somebody comes in the shop and needs to borrow an ink pen to write something down, we'll use those. These guys here are going to be going with me to the meet and greet that we've got coming up Friday. I always like to have like takeaways for folks, even if it's someone that's not from my channel. I like to have a takeaway that's kind of a little piece of what the shack does. And so I made these black ones. I've had the blue ones for quite a while. These are the same pins. I got them, they were just a different box. I did these a while back, and I have been handing these out for a couple of years. I've got a few of them left, but I bought a couple of really big boxes of these things, so I got plenty of them left to go. So I just wanted to make sure I had enough pins for Friday, so I wanted to batch out a couple of them. And I've had a lot of people asking me questions about being able to do jigs with their lasers, regardless of which laser they have. And the thing that I want to emphasize, guys, is don't overthink it. Don't try to let other people make this thing harder than it has to be. There's 1,000 ways of doing this. Some machines make it a little easier than others. There are machines that have cameras that are really, really accurate. Are they accurate enough to be able to do this? In my opinion, very few machines are. But you can get some, good setup and a little good tool, but you still need to use framing. You still need to create fixtures, jigs, or whatever for your machine. Now that I've went through all of this work, getting this set up, all I have to do is remove that jig from my machine, store it away, and then the next time I get ready to do some more ink pens, I put it back in there. Hopefully I can index it the way that it's supposed to be correctly the first time. Next time, do a little bit of testing just to make sure everything's where it needs to be, and just hit them and go. It makes things a lot easier when you're doing large batches. But like I said, whether you have a Rolly Lasermatic, an X-Tool D1, an Otour LaserMaster 3, SculptFun S30, Algo Laser Alpha, Aesmer, Elegoo, no matter what you have, the principles are the same. You've got to have two things. You've got to have the machine and the work area. It has to be in the same spot. You have to have a way of making that repeatable. Like as accurate as you want your engrave to be, the positioning needs to be repeatable to that level of accuracy. Once you've established that, then it's just a matter of being able to take your material, put it in there, cut the item shapes out, put the material back, set the jig up, whatever, and then send the burn, and then save it. Once you find that right setup, save it and hang on to those files, because that's what's going to save you time and money on the next job, is the fact that you've already taken the time to make this jig and you can use it next time. So putting this thing away and saving it for the next batch of pins is exactly what I'll be doing, just like I've got the one for the bamboo cutting boards. Because today I've got all the pins done that I needed to get done, but I've got this now for this machine. I have other jigs that I make for other machines, and I probably had one laying around 4 pins. These are some of the ones that I use for some of my projects and stuff when I'm jigging things out. This uses the little teeth that I run with, like the Atom Stacks and some of the open gantry machines. And the way that I do those is I've built myself a little bracket that basically allows me to secure the machine, keep it from moving by attaching it to the enclosure, spoil board, whatever, and then attaching everything else, making everything stationary and using those little teeth to lock things in place. Make sure that they're always in the same place every time. So if this kind of stuff's something you're into, go check out the Etsy shop. I've got some older products on there. I've got a universal kit that works with a lot of the newer machines that may not be listed. Now that we're moving away from open gantry machines, a lot of times you can use this technique using the honeycomb or some indexable physical location inside your workspace to do the same process. And I've got lots of videos on the process, just like the one from today, but I keep getting a lot of people messaging me saying that I've got this machine or I've got that machine and I need a jig kit for a jig system. When in essence, you really don't need the jig system as much as you just need to learn how to use this procedure using either your honeycomb bed, or if you have indexing pins, or you have some other method set up to physically reference every time, then you can get the same results just using your honeycomb, as long as it's fixed. So those are some of the things to remember, is make sure that your machine is consistent. Every time you put something in there, like a jig or a fixture, you want it to be in exactly the same place. Some of the cheaper machines don't offer pinned honeycombs and stuff like that. I've had some of the X-Tool products in the past that the honeycomb just flopped around. So those are obstacles that you have to overcome when you're trying to batch things out like that. But that's one reason why I do like the Omtech as my CO2 currently, is because I have the ability to use this technique with this machine. The honeycomb is fixed, it doesn't move around, the machine is accurate, like I can home the machine and it's going to consistently go back out to where it did the time before. And so those are things that you have to have in a machine to be able to do that. If you're losing steps, or if your machine's slinging itself apart and sliding around, that it's not going to work. It needs to be consistent, and you need to have everything in the same place every time, and make sure to save your file and not move anything. But that's the process, guys. I hope the video helps. If you still haven't grasped it, go just search for jigs in my content, and there's plenty of other videos to show you on other machines. And for those guys that hung around to tell me how much faster this would have been on a Galvo, yes, I got those too. But this video was to help some of the folks that have CO2 machines or blue diode machines, such as the Craft or whatever, that are having issues with this. This wasn't intended to be a Galvo video, so maybe next time. But until next time, guys, be safe and have a good day.